I'm on a journey to a world where the impossible becomes possible.
Oh, this is really exciting.
With exclusive access to the world's most impressive feats of engineering.
Wow. It's scale, Richard.
I'll meet desert daredevils.
They'll swing out, they set off the dynamite, then swing back.
And pioneers of land and sea.
I mean, the proportions of these structures are just immense.
Who risked it all.
I'm very aware that there are things out here.
You had people dying every other day.
I'll uncover the secrets of the most extraordinary structures ever built. This time, a major energy crisis triggers a desperate quest.
It's as hard as it gets. It's like working in space.
And a dangerous rush for black gold.
What is that worst-case scenario? You could lose the rig.
It's a story of mega structures.
This is an absolute whopper.
Clever machines.
It was pushing this technology to the very limits of what it could do.
And a prize millions of years in the making.
We've got oil. It smells like tar.
This is the story of Britain's North Sea oil rigs. It's 1956 and Britain is booming. But there's a very big, very dark cloud looming on the horizon. In November, Britain and France launched a military assault on Egypt in an effort to seize the Suez Canal, a major transport route for oil coming from the Middle East to Europe. In retaliation, Egypt blockaded the canal. Britain's oil supply was slashed by almost 40%. The country was plunged into an energy crisis.
In winter, as motorists queue for their coupons and their 200 miles of motoring a month.
The government imposed petrol rationing, and some industries even introduced a 4-day week to save fuel.
Is this going to affect your business drastically?
Well, if it stays as it is, I think it will, yes.
Thankfully, the crisis came to an end after just 5 months, and the oil began to flow once again. But the conflict with Egypt had given the UK a major scare. The country relied too heavily on imported oil.
Britain needed to find a supply of oil and gas much closer to home.
But finding the quantities needed to supply Britain's growing demand for energy would be an epic quest, fraught with danger for those brave enough to take up the challenge. The smart money said the black gold was hidden deep beneath the unforgiving waves of the North Sea.
The reason geologists suspected there was a high chance of finding oil and gas in the North Sea were driven by experience on land. In Holland, in 1959, the Dutch discovered the Groningen gas field, and the geological formations in the north of Holland there are essentially the same as those that are under the North Sea.
It was, frankly, a guessing game. But if the experts were right, the landmass beneath the North Sea could be a vast source of gas and oil. But finding the best place to drill was going to be a momentous task. Locating reserves underneath these unrelenting waves wouldn't be easy, and called for technology borrowed from another brutal era.
They initially used seismic exploration using sonar that was used in World War II to detect submarines, sending sound waves down into the sea and into the subsurface below that, and looking at the echoes that come back.
Sonar readings showed changes in the density of rock beneath the seabed. These changes could indicate the presence of oil or gas.
It was pushing this technology to the very limits of what it could do. It's one thing to find a metal object a few hundred feet under the ocean, but to find oil a mile or more under the seabed is a much more difficult target.
Sonar could suggest where oil or gas might be, but there was only one way geologists could be certain they'd hit the jackpot. They'd need to find a way of drilling down into the rock beneath the seabed to take samples. and that would require a monumental piece of heavy engineering: the offshore drilling rig.
This is the Well-Safe Protector. It's a modern jack-up rig. Now, rigs like this would be towed out to sea with the platform, that red section, floating on the water. And then, when it's in position, these 3 towering legs would be lowered through the platform down to the sea floor. And then the platform would be raised up slightly, and the rig is then ready to start its drilling operations.
Raising the rig above the waves saves these mammoth platforms from being tossed about by the turbulent waters of the North Sea. Their towering legs keep them firmly in place. Back in 1965, Britain's first offshore rig, called the Sea-Gem, was making its way out into the North Sea on its maiden voyage. This great-grandfather of the modern jack-up rig was little more than a converted barge with 10 legs welded to its hull. But the 5,500-ton beast would prove to be a lifeline. One of the pioneers on board was engineer Kevin Topham.
Kevin, this is a cracking shot. Is that you there?
That's me, the good-looking one.
I got you. Yeah, no, I can tell.
Kevin joined the oil business in the early 1950s after serving 6 years in the RAF. Unlike some of the Sea-Gem crew, Kevin had worked in drilling onshore, and his experience would prove invaluable.
Do you remember the first time you ever went on board the Sea-Gem?
Well, yeah, because it looked like a forest of legs, because there were 10 200-foot legs sticking out of the sea. And it's a dangerous place to work on a drilling rig and lose an arm or fingers or toes. And a lot of that went off.
Despite the dangers, Kevin and the Sea-Gem crew were in a race against time. Theirs wasn't the only rig hunting for oil beneath the waves. The North Sea was in the midst of a black gold rush, and no expense was spared in the quest.
If you're drilling and you want another drill bit, they'd send a special chopper out with it.
Would they?
Oh, yeah.
Is that part of the fact that there was this kind of race on, and that anything you needed, they'd get to you as quickly as they could?
Yeah, to do its job, yeah. There was actually 3 or 4 American rigs round ours.
Right.
In the North Sea, but they'd all struck dry wells. And they weren't very happy when we got the first strike.
In September 1965, Sea-Gem hit the jackpot. A pocket of natural gas 42 miles off the Lincolnshire coast.
It was kept secret. If we advertised it too much and the Yanks got hold of it, they'd come and drill beside us.
Did you feel this kind of pioneering spirit?
Well, the local papers got a bit of wind of it and took photographs of us and made out we were heroes, which we weren't.
The Sea-Gem discovery was a game changer. It proved there was natural gas buried deep under the North Sea and within British waters. And where there was gas, there'd be oil. But Sea-Gem's success would be short-lived. The extreme conditions of the North Sea would soon take a devastating toll. While millions of Britons were celebrating the Christmas of 1965, pioneering teams of British and American oilmen were braving the elements in a bid to be the first to find oil beneath the North Sea. Britain's first offshore rig, the Sea-Gem, had already discovered gas 3 months earlier, and where there's gas, there should be oil. On December the 27th, the rig was 42 miles off the Humberside coast. Engineer Kevin Topham was on board.
When I was sitting in the mess room, just finished my Christmas lunch,
right,
2:30 in the afternoon, and there was a huge bang, and I thought, that doesn't sound very good. Next thing, it went to 45 degrees, and it was steel floor, So everything was sliding down the steel floor. Everything. Tables, chairs, men.
The almighty bang was the sound of two of the Sea Gem's legs snapping. The 5,500-ton rig began to lurch into the freezing cold sea.
My intention was to go back to my cabin and get a life jacket, which I didn't do. Good job I didn't. It was underwater, could see it.
The lifeboats, helicopter landing pad and radio equipment crashed into the sea. There was no way of evacuating the rig, no way of sending a distress call.
You were outside at this point.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Freezing to death. I went down, stood on the handrail, it was up to there in seawater. It was going down pretty fast. I mean, the drilling derrick, which was 200 foot high, broke its moorings on deck, and it plonked down beside us.
It crashed down beside you into the sea?
Yeah. Another couple of feet and it had taken us with it.
The crew were running out of options.
And the radio operator said, I can get to that little boat out there. I said, well, I can't swim that far, I'm not that good, because I could see waves come. They're going up, they're getting worse. So he went, phew. I watched him climb in. When they picked him out, 5 minutes later, he died. Just the cold, froze. 19.
It took half an hour for the entire rig to disappear beneath the waves, with only a single piece of a steel leg remaining. Luckily, a cargo ship, the Bull Trover, was passing close by and saw the unfolding disaster.
I got picked out the water and plonked on the deck of the Bull Trover, and they took us back on that to land.
Do you remember seeing the last of the Sea Gem platform before it disappeared into the sea?
I didn't look because I'd got away from it.
Yeah.
There were 32 men on board. Of them, 19 were brought ashore safely, 5 are definitely dead, and the other 8 are still listed as missing.
Nobody told my wife or anything. I'd been plucked out of the sea. They'd all seen it on the news and that.
Your wife didn't know at that point that you'd survived?
No, she didn't. Nobody told her because they didn't know. It was a bit of a shambles because it had never happened before.
Of course.
The oil industry had never experienced a tragedy at sea like this before. Britain's first offshore rig had been destroyed, with the loss of 13 crew. Yet, despite the disaster, the Sea Gem had succeeded in its mission. It had found natural gas under the North Sea, a clear indication there was oil beneath the waves.
And in 1970, British Petroleum, or BP, confirmed that when they discovered oil in a vast area beneath the seabed that became known as the Forties Field.
Covering 35 square miles of seabed, the Forties Field was thought to hold over 2.5 billion barrels of oil.
But this was all still the early days. Actual production of oil and gas was yet to begin.
The infrastructure that was needed to exploit this colossal discovery did not yet exist. Until it could be built, Britain would continue to depend on foreign oil imported from the Middle East. And in 1973, that would spell disaster for the British economy. On the 6th of October, Egypt and Syria invaded Israel. In retaliation, Arab countries slashed oil production. The price of a barrel of oil quadrupled.
Britain was plunged into almost wartime rationing. Businesses were on 3-day working weeks to save electricity, and there were regular power cuts, food shortages, and petrol price hikes. Prime Minister Edward Heath even considered banning people from heating more than one room in their homes that winter.
But as the country reeled from fuel shortages out in the North Sea, the solution to Britain's energy woes was slowly taking shape. 4 giant production platforms were being constructed for the Forties oil field. Forties Alpha and Bravo at a disused shipyard in Teesside, and Charlie and Delta in Scotland's Cromarty Firth. Together, they would allow BP to extract the huge volumes of oil Britain needed to help get its economy back on track. These titans dwarfed many smaller drilling rigs, and unlike the mobile rigs which moved around the sea searching for oil, these were fixed to the seabed. The gas and oil would be extracted from a series of wells dug into the rock, then drawn up to the platforms via a vast network of pipes. The future of Britain's economy rested on the shoulders of these 4 steel giants.
The black gold finally began to flow on the 3rd of November 1975. 4 production platforms extracted the oil and sent it along a 36-inch diameter pipe from the oil field 110 miles out to sea back to shore at Cruden Bay. Within just a few years, the Forties oil field was producing more than 500,000 barrels of oil a day.
The oil was being pumped from almost 7,000 feet beneath the seabed. But how did it get there? I'm going to Nottingham University to find out. Dr. Clement Uguna has studied the processes which create oil deep underground. He says he can do in several hours what takes Mother Nature millions of years to create.
That's Clement.
Hello, Rob.
Good to meet you.
How you doing?
I'm great, thank you. I'm great. So, oil and gas that's being extracted from the North Sea, how is that created?
Oil and gas comes from breakdown of sedimentary rocks. As the rocks are buried deep underground, temperature increases, pressure increases, the rocks breaks down. It's like cooking it anyway.
Yeah.
And gradually, over millions of years, oils gradually seep out of the rock. To speed up the process, we do an experiment using these specially made high-pressure vessels.
So you can recreate in this lab what happens in nature
underground,
under the North Sea?
Yes.
To turn
that into oil.
We've got an 8-gram sample of the type of sedimentary rock you find buried beneath the North Sea. The rock is formed from minerals and the decomposed remains of prehistoric algae and bacteria. It's this organic matter within the rock that, under the right conditions, can be transformed into oil.
We have the reactor. Do you want to have a go?
I'd love to.
Yeah, go on then.
Can I set it up?
That's the source rock.
Okay. In it goes.
Our rock goes into a special high-pressure reactor, which will mimic the massive pressures and temperatures found deep underground. The only thing we need to add is water. It helps the oil flow out of the rock.
Right, that is all down nice and tight, because we're going to be creating a fair amount of pressure in there.
That should give you about 500 bar pressure.
200 times the kind of pressure you get in your car tyres.
Yeah.
And is that kind of representative of the kind of pressures that the rock is subjected to underground?
Yes, about 5 kilometers, 6 kilometers.
5-6 kilometers underground, you'll be getting about that 500 bar.
Yeah.
Is that ready to go then?
Yeah.
In nature, the rock is subjected to extreme heat and pressure over millions of years to create oil. In Clement's lab, it takes just 6 hours.
Here we go. I'm quite excited.
Take it out gradually.
I'm getting a smell already.
Yeah, there should be some oil.
We've got oil? That's definitely, I mean, that's like a thick, crudy kind of oil, kind of like it smells like tar.
Yeah.
That's really thick, isn't it? Is that crude oil that's come out of there?
Typical crude oil, yeah.
By examining small oil samples produced from rock samples like these, Clement can analyse the quality of oil that might be contained inside a rock formation. Oil companies carry out similar tests to help them make decisions on where to drill for oil.
So in here, we've got our oil that's mixed in with water. And all of this, though, has come from just
8 grams.
8 grams of this, this rock.
Yeah. Sorry for the smell.
Don't apologise. It's all part of it.
Back in the mid-1980s, the UK was in the midst of an energy boom. It had joined the club of oil exporting nations. But North Sea oil had taken millions of years to form. Once it had been extracted, it was gone for good. So to keep up with demand, new oil fields needed to be found. The hunt was on once again, and this time in deeper waters. It was a job for a new breed of offshore rig, the semi-submersible.
From down here, boy, do you get a sense of scale. This mighty drilling platform weighs a whopping 26,000 tons.
Built in 1987, this rig has drilled for oil in the perilous waters of the northernmost parts of the North Sea.
The derrick, or that tall tower in the centre of the structure that houses all the drilling equipment, that's the height of Nelson's column. I mean, the proportions of these structures are just immense.
But unlike jack-up rigs, which stand on the sea floor so are limited by the length of their steel legs, these semi-submersibles actually float. That means they can venture into the deepest waters of the North Sea. This one can operate at a depth of 4,500 feet, 10 times that of a typical jack-up rig. It's a truly astonishing piece of engineering. The other big advantage of the semi-submersible is its incredible stability in violent seas.
Now you can see that the 8 giant legs on this platform sit on 2 enormously long pontoons. There's one on each side.
Those pontoons are partially filled with water, which acts as ballast, keeping the structure steady in choppy waters. The rig is held in place over the drilling site by anchors and thruster motors. These rigs, developed for the extreme conditions of the North Sea, are now used for deep water drilling all over the world. In the 1980s, semi-submersibles had opened up the deepest, most inhospitable waters of the North Sea to oil exploration.
But the North Sea oil industry was about to be dealt a terrible blow. The entire world would soon be reminded just how perilous the hunt for offshore oil could be.
Offshore drilling rigs have been producing North Sea oil for over 40 years. At the heart of every rig is the drill floor. It's from here that the drill string, the column of pipe which bores into the earth and draws up oil, is operated. It's a dangerous and dirty job, which for years has been done by hand. But on today's most advanced rigs, the process is helped along by some pretty advanced engineering. I've come along to Aberdeen's Robert Gordon University to get a taste of what it's like to drill for oil in the 21st century. This state-of-the-art simulator is an exact replica of a modern semi-submersible rig. It allows operators to practice the complex job of drilling before doing it for real. I'm going to be put through my paces by veteran driller Alan Souter.
Nice to meet you.
Jump in the chair, make yourself comfortable.
So I'm your assistant driller, is that right?
You are my assistant today.
Okay.
Alan spent 16 years drilling for oil offshore, from the North Sea to the Falkland Islands.
All right, Alan, so what's the scenario that we're going to simulate here today that hopefully I can help with?
Now, we've been drilling, and the drill bit's actually worn out. And the drill bit's 6,000 feet away. We need to get the drill bit from where it is back to surface so we can change it, pulling it out sections at a time.
It will be my job to disconnect each 120 feet section of pipe as it comes to the surface and store it away safely, using a bit of kit called a hydrotong, essentially a giant hydraulic wrench.
All right, let's get started then. And we've got a lot of pipe to bring up.
We do, yeah. So I'm going to get the first stand ready for you.
Here we go. Yeah, okay. You're basically bringing it up. Well, it starts to happen, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whilst I'm concentrating on operating my supersized wrench, Alan's keeping an eye on the pressure in the oil well. A sudden increase in pressure could, if not spotted, be catastrophic.
So if something were to go wrong with the pressure in the well, what is that worst case scenario?
If we didn't recognise what was going on, a blowout. That would be worst case scenario, in which case potentially you could lose the rig.
Really?
If things got that bad.
Yeah, that sounds really bad.
Yeah, we don't want that to happen.
A blowout is an uncontrolled surge of oil or gas from the well. and can have disastrous effects on the environment, causing offshore oil spills and risking lives on the rig. On our simulated rig, with Alan keeping across the pressure, it's time for me to take the controls.
Now I want you to take your left joystick,
Yeah.
and then push the joystick forward.
Okay.
Keep pushing forward.
Ooh.
I'm ready to swing the massive hydrotongs into position.
So joystick.
Yep.
And just keep it held forward and it'll stop. So release the joystick, then it's going to spin to rotate out the threads.
This is going to break the connection between our top 4 sections of pipe and all those other sections beneath.
That's correct.
Okay. Oh, so up comes the pipe.
Yeah.
This big gantry is bringing it away, and that's racked up nice and neat in with all the other ones over there. It's like putting a snooker cue away. This is amazing.
Out at sea, this process needs to run like clockwork.
So how long would it typically take out in the field to draw up this 6,000-foot long drill pipe and rack it all away neatly?
Perfectly likely that we could pull out the hole at 2,000, 3,000 feet an hour. The efficiency is key to make sure that the operations are running as smoothly as possible, but more importantly than that, make sure they run as safely as possible.
What I'm experiencing here is very high-end technology that has come on a long way since the first rigs went out into the North Sea. But even with all that technology on my side, it requires a lot of a focus, a lot of attention, and there's a lot of responsibility that you hold when you're operating the drill and having to be mindful of what's happening thousands of feet away.
Ever since the search for North Sea oil began, the industry has depended on people like Alan, who are prepared to leave their families and friends to live offshore for weeks at a time. Almost 50 years ago, the crew of Britain's first rig, the Sea Gem, were the guinea pigs for this unconventional way of life. Kevin Topham was one of them.
It was basic. Sometimes it was 2 men to a bunk. There weren't all that many separate beds, because it wasn't big enough. Your sheets and your blankets, etc., would be changed when you was changing shifts. That was life.
Although the accommodation was cramped, the crew did have some home comforts.
I couldn't fault the food. The cook would come out and say to me, "What do you want for your meal, Kevin?"
Really?
So I'd say, "I think I'll have steak tonight." You could have what you want. We were spoiled like that for food.
In the years since the Sea Gem pioneered offshore drilling, thousands of men and women have followed in Kevin's footsteps. These days, as many as 11,000 people can be working out in the North Sea at any one time. Award-winning photographer Peter Ian Campbell spent 2 years documenting life offshore while working as a steward on a drilling rig 150 miles off the Aberdeenshire coast.
I'm just enjoying this whole image. Who are these guys?
Yeah, so this is the deck crew in the T-shack, the area for the deck crew to have their breaks. You've got your deck foreman, crane, and assistant crane operators, so real characters. I got on really well with these guys.
Would that be quite a loud environment if they're on break? There's stories, there's banter going on the whole time.
Great banter. Yeah. Great banter. I mean, you have to have pretty thick skin working offshore.
That's life offshore, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's no escape at the end of the day.
Yeah.
You go home to family and friends because of that sort of sense of isolation away from people that you knew. You had to just connect with people, and there is that sense of camaraderie.
Drilling rigs are 24/7 operations. Crew work grueling 12-hour shifts, which for members of the drill team can mean hours on deck in the freezing cold.
So I'm assuming that downtime was really important to keeping people's morale and keeping them sane out there.
Yeah, it was important. So this is on the platform supply vessel. They actually had a basketball ring on deck, and so their downtime was shooting hoops. There's gyms, and that's quite good. You have a sauna as well. They've got saunas.
You've got a sauna out there?
Yeah.
Now we're getting to it. It's just 5-star out there.
I wouldn't say that, but I mean, that was quite nice. I mean, particularly in winter, more so for the crews that were outdoors. Yeah, nice wee bit of time in the sauna.
This one here just goes to show how isolated you are, how for 3 weeks you're going to see nothing but sea and sky around you.
Yeah, and that was what it was like. And it can be claustrophobic if you're spending, 12 hours inside the rig. So even although you might be really far out at sea, it's never quiet. Even inside, there's always a humming. There's this underlying humming of the rig, whether it be from the engine room, pump room, drill floor, or the crane operations. It's noisy. So I really enjoyed the end of my shift, being able to go outside and photographing the seascapes.
It is such a different world to anything that you're going to experience onshore, on land. And these photos depict that beautifully.
Working on a platform perched high above the treacherous waters of the North Sea is not for the faint-hearted. From the helicopter commute to work, to the risks posed by heavy machinery on deck, crew face constant dangers. But it's the highly flammable gas and oil which pose the biggest hazard. Even a small leak has the potential to cause catastrophic damage.
And on the 6th of July 1988, that's exactly what happened, about 120 miles off the coast of Aberdeen. It would become the world's deadliest offshore oil field disaster.
Piper Alpha was the first production platform for the Piper field, which was one of the first fields discovered in the North Sea. It was about 300 meters high, a big beast.
On the evening of the accident, there were 226 people aboard Piper Alpha.
At 10 p.m, the platform was rocked by an explosion on the production deck.
It was thought to have been caused by a gas leak from a pump. A critical pressure safety valve had been removed for maintenance. When members of the night shift switched the pump on, they had no idea the valve was missing. The explosion started an oil fire on board. Some parts of the platform were engulfed in dense black smoke.
20 minutes later, there was a second huge blast. A gas riser, a pipe bringing gas up from the seabed, had ruptured.
As the fire intensified, many of the off-duty crew were sheltering inside the accommodation block. Some escaped by climbing down ropes or jumping into the sea. Those who remained faced certain death. The explosions had caused irreparable damage to the platform's structure.
At 11:20 p.m, Piper Alpha began to collapse into the sea.
This accommodation block slid off the rig into the North Sea, and I think it was 81 people in that accommodation block went into the North Sea and perished.
By the next morning, 3/4 of the topside structure, the parts of the platform above the waterline, had been destroyed.
Multiple oil and gas lines which fed into the platform were ablaze, the flames reaching 200 meters into the sky.
The fire on board the stricken Piper Alpha platform was being fanned by 40-knot winds today, and the millions of gallons of seawater poured on the flames seems to have made little impression.
It took 3 weeks for specialist firefighting teams to extinguish the flames, working in some of the most challenging conditions imaginable.
The Piper Alpha disaster claimed the lives of 167 men. The investigation which followed concluded it had been caused by human error. Today, there are rigorous systems of inspection and maintenance to ensure that rigs and platforms are safe places of work. But when it comes to maintaining the parts of an installation that sits below the waves, it's a particularly complex task.
A lot of these assets have been in place since the 60s, 70s. They're decades old.
Yeah.
The amount of infrastructure down there is huge, and all of it needs to be maintained. And you think you've got thousands of kilometres of pipelines out there, everyone needs to get inspected, because in an offshore environment, you don't know what's happened.
Millions of gallons of oil are pumped from beneath the North Sea every year. This vast network not only has to withstand merciless sea conditions, it's also vulnerable to damage by passing ships. If a pipe is struck by the anchor chain of a vessel, it could cause an oil leak, which would be disastrous for marine life. It's essential that these subsea pipelines are kept in good working order.
How do you inspect this
this mass of equipment that's buried out of sight in the water?
So we have remotely operated vehicles at deep ocean, which are underwater robots. So what we have here first is it's a typical annual pipeline inspection, and it'll just move along looking for anything that may be a sign of damage or dents, ruptures, gas leaks, just if maybe something's not quite how it should be.
So it's someone's job to pore over this footage and just keeping their eyes out. I mean, eagle eyes for anything that might not seem right.
Yeah, everything gets recorded, everything's commented on.
How deep down is this one, do you know?
This one's about 115 metres.
It's pretty clear, you can see quite a lot.
Yeah, you can see the pipe quite clearly. There's quite a lot of marine life in this one.
Yeah.
These high-tech survey robots are controlled by a team of technicians from the safety of a ship nearby.
They have a green laser you can see at the bottom of the screen.
Yep.
That's there as a measurement reference. It allows the surveyors to know exactly where that pipeline is. So if they find something that doesn't seem right, they know with pinpoint accuracy where the issue is.
If there was anything to repair on a pipeline, say, like this, would that be done by remote vehicles and robots as well?
There's technology out there now where you could go in, block off the pipeline on a small location in the middle of it. You can cut it, get that pipe out there and replace it with a new spool.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible technology.
And it strikes me that doing that kind of operation on land, you know, there are risks and challenges involved in that. If you're doing this down at the bottom of the sea, what we're talking about here within oil and gas industry, it's the best of the best, to use a Top Gun phrase.
Yeah, I can't argue with that, to be fair. No, it is. It's working subsea. It's almost equivalent to like working in space. You know, it's as hard as it gets.
Eventually, though, these rigs, pipes and platforms reached the end of their working lives. And that's when these titans of British energy lay down their biggest challenge yet. For almost 60 years, mobile drilling rigs have been the workhorses of the offshore gas and oil industry. It's their job to search out untapped deposits beneath the waves.
When rigs like these aren't required out in the North Sea, they need to be stored away somewhere. And what with its deep water and natural protection from the big seas and harsh weather offshore, Cromarty Firth is the perfect spot.
This natural harbour sits on the northeast coast of Scotland, close to the oil fields of the North Sea.
It's become a bit like this scaled-up car park for rigs. Some stop in for just a few months, whilst others are here for years and may undergo some maintenance work before they're ready to head out and be put back to work. I've never been so close to platforms like this when they're out in the water. I mean, there's this one here immediately, and there's a second one behind it. There's another two at least behind that. In fact, at the moment, there are 7 offshore platforms and rigs here in Cromarty Firth.
Some of these rigs may have many more years at sea ahead of them, but the law says that when they do eventually retire, they must be removed from the marine environment. That means ending their days in a specialist shipbreaking yard, which goes for the entire oil field infrastructure, no matter how big it's become. When the 40-year-old Brent Delta platform came to the end of its life, oil company Shell set about the mammoth task of dismantling it. In 2017, the topside structure of this 24,000-ton giant was sliced off and lifted onto a huge crane ship to be taken ashore and broken up. It took engineers almost 2 years to fully take the structure apart. When platforms are dismantled, the thousands of tons of plastic, steel and concrete are brought to yards like this in Peterhead.
It's a busy old yard, this, isn't it? There's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, this is one of the licensed yards that we can take some of the oil field debris into, so there's always stuff coming in from offshore. The majority of the work takes place subsea. We have the ROVs, the remote operated vehicles. They'll be in the water and setting up the tools in order to complete cuts, and then we can use the crane to lift the material out.
Matthew and his team use giant diamond cutters to slice through underwater structures, everything from pipes to the huge legs of a rig. Now it's time for me to get to grips with this impressive piece of kit.
This cut we're already clamped on, so you're only going to have to do is turn your motor on. So we're going to push this lever fully forward.
Yep. Well, hey, we're up. So I can see we're running there now.
Yep, that's just cutting.
Today we're safely on the quayside, but when the team do this at sea, the cutter is underwater and they're controlling it remotely from the deck of a ship. It's painstaking work.
We've been going for a good 10 minutes here and we're only about halfway. And that's only for a, 16-inch diameter pipe.
Matthew's team can be at sea for 4 weeks at a time dismantling a single installation.
Hey, there it goes. Clean slice right through the steel. Job done.
But breaking up the components of a retired offshore platform is only part of the process.
We can then strip down all the materials and into their composite parts, and then they can then be reused either for the same purpose or recycled into something different. We actually are working with the local football club, and we're going to even potentially be recycling some of these plastics into the seats in the new stadium.
Oh really? So a lot of the materials gets recycled?
We aim to have 99% of it reused or recycled.
That's absolutely amazing.
Decommissioning all of the UK's retired offshore structures is a very expensive business. Estimates suggest the final bill could be as much as £48 billion. But some experts believe not every rig should be removed from the sea.
New research suggests that leaving some offshore structures, like the legs of an oil rig, out at sea could actually be beneficial to the marine environment.
In the Gulf of Mexico, off the southern coast of the United States, over 500 disused platforms have been left in place, or reefed. The topsides have been removed and the subsea structure abandoned to nature. The project, known as Rigs to Reef, has created hundreds of artificial habitats for marine life. Experts think each of these 8-legged platforms here could be home to up to 14,000 fish.
This provides an artificial reef effect. So in effect, you create an entire ecosystem out of what previously would just be a sort of sandy bed.
The experiment has caught the attention of experts working in the colder waters of the Northern Hemisphere.
There is growing consensus within the academic community that this is something we should be considering in the North Sea. Really, we need some good scientific understanding, monitoring things like the biodiversity, what the impacts are on the seabed, and also are there any contamination risks that might be associated with leaving a structure in place. Maybe a bit of time, a decade or so, to understand what the impact of leaving these structures in place really means for the marine environment.
Britain's offshore oil and gas industry was born out of a very real need to try and gain energy independence and end our reliance on imported fuels. And what was achieved in a relatively short space of time is a truly remarkable feat.
Today, there's a slow transition taking place towards renewable energy. The North Sea, which for decades produced the gas and oil which contributed to climate change, is the site of the world's biggest offshore wind farm. But these rigs are not yet redundant, and they're a stark reminder that we continue to rely heavily on fossil fuels.
However you look upon them, there is no denying that these giants and the jobs they do are marvels of 20th century science and technology that push the boundaries of the engineering mindset that anything is possible.